They looked like the perfect Hollywood couple, the rising starlet and the rebel who would become the king of cool. But behind closed doors, their marriage was anything but a fairy tale. Neile has since confessed to moments so dark and so shocking that even decades later, they still made her deeply emotional. Behind the flashing cameras, their love unraveled in shadows. And what began as passion slowly twisted into control, betrayal, and heartbreak. And even after it ended, Neile admitted that a part of her never let Steve McQueen go. But the truth behind their failed marriage is so heartbreaking, it remains one of the most haunting chapters of Neile's life. Neile Adams' rise to fame. Before her life became tied to one of Hollywood's most legendary yet troubled actors, Neile Adams had already carved out a remarkable story of her own. She was successful, admired, and resilient, a woman who seemed to have everything working in her favor. Yet behind that success was a history marked by hardship and survival, and later, a marriage so toxic and painful that it overshadowed many of her triumphs. Neile Adams was born Ruby Neelam Salvador Adams on July 10, 1932, to a broken family. Her father was a wealthy businessman. However, she never met him. Her parents' relationship ended before she could form any connection with him, leaving her mother to raise her. Neile's early years were anything but easy. The outbreak of World War II transformed the Philippines into one of the most dangerous places in the Pacific. As a child, she was forced into an environment where survival demanded courage beyond her years. Her resilience showed in a way few could ever imagine, and she became involved with the Philippine resistance against Japanese occupation. Neile served as a spy, carrying out missions that could have cost her life. She even suffered a wound from shrapnel, a permanent reminder of the violence that engulfed her childhood. For most people, this would have been a defining tragedy, but for Neile, it became proof that she was capable of surviving anything. When the war ended, she was determined to rebuild her life. And so, in 1948, at just 16 years old, she made a bold decision to leave Manila and head for the United States. Arriving in New York City, she pursued an education in dance at the Katharine Dunham School. This was no ordinary choice. The Dunham School was a pioneering institution that trained dancers in modern techniques, incorporating global influences that broke away from the rigid traditions of classical ballet. For Neile, it was the perfect environment to develop her artistry. However, as she pursued opportunities in performance, she quickly realized that her Filipino heritage could limit the kind of roles she would be offered. Hollywood in the 1950s was not known for its inclusivity, and actors of color were often sidelined, stereotyped, or typecast. Neile understood this harsh reality and made a practical decision to change her name from Ruby Neelam Salvador to Neile Adams. By adopting a more Americanized name, she gave herself a chance to be considered for roles based on her talent, rather than being dismissed outright for her background. This wasn't about denying who she was, but rather finding a way to navigate a system that was deeply unfair. Her perseverance paid off. She started making her mark on Broadway, where her training and stage presence stood out. She appeared in productions that allowed her to showcase both her dancing and acting skills, quickly building a reputation as a versatile performer. From Broadway, she transitioned into film and television. Her film debut in the 1950s signaled her arrival in Hollywood. While she was not cast as a traditional leading lady, she earned roles that displayed her adaptability, whether in musical numbers, light comedies, or dramatic pieces. On television, she became a familiar face, appearing in episodes of popular shows during the golden age of TV. These appearances made her recognizable to audiences across America, and more importantly, they helped her secure steady work in a field where opportunities for someone of her heritage were extremely limited. Neile was also a pioneer. Filipino-American representation in Hollywood was virtually non-existent at the time. She stood as one of the few performers who managed to cross over into mainstream American entertainment. Her success, though perhaps not headline-grabbing compared to the biggest stars of her era, was groundbreaking in its own right. It set a precedent and opened doors, even if only slightly, for other performers of Asian and mixed heritage who would follow after her. But while her career was gaining momentum and her future looked bright, her personal life was about to take a turn that no amount of resilience could fully shield her from. It was in this moment, when her name was beginning to mean something in Hollywood, that she met a young, ambitious actor named Steve McQueen. But what followed would be a relationship that started with passion, but soon spiraled into chaos, leaving Neile with scars far deeper than the ones she carried from her childhood war years. Meeting Steve McQueen. By the mid-1950s, Neile Adams was already enjoying the fruits of her hard work. She had a foothold in the world of Broadway, a name that was gaining recognition in Hollywood, and the kind of career stability that most young actors and dancers could only dream of. But in 1956, her life took an unexpected turn when she crossed paths with a man who seemed destined for greatness, even though, at the time, he was barely scraping by. Neile Adams and Steve McQueen's first meeting took place on Broadway, where both were working in productions, though Neile was far ahead in terms of visibility and career trajectory. McQueen, by contrast, was still considered a struggling actor, hustling for parts, and trying to claw his way into an industry that had little patience for the unproven. Neile, already established, carried herself with the confidence of someone who had worked hard for her success, while McQueen exuded a different kind of restless and hungry energy. The contrast between them was striking, but perhaps that was what drew them together so quickly. Their first date set the tone for everything that would follow. McQueen, ever the thrill-seeker, invited Neile on a motorcycle ride. There was no fancy dinner or cautious first steps into romance, just speed and danger. According to Neile's own accounts, his words to her that night were simple but revealing. Get on and hold on tight. But it wasn't just a literal instruction. It was almost a metaphor for what life with him would become. McQueen's world was fast, unpredictable, and risky. And by choosing to hold on that night, Neile was unknowingly stepping into a ride that would last years and would take her to dizzying heights of passion and love, but also plunge her into moments of deep pain. The chemistry between them was undeniable. Just 4 months after that first date, they were married in 1956. The speed of their commitment reflected not only the intensity of their feelings, but also the way both of them approached life, impulsively, passionately, and with a certain disregard for caution. For Neile, who had survived a war and had already faced risky stakes as a child, McQueen's daring nature felt familiar, even intoxicating. For McQueen, Neile offered something he had never truly experienced before: stability, support, and genuine belief in his talent. When they tied the knot, McQueen was far from the icon he would later become. He was an actor still trying to get noticed in auditions and still trying to land that role that would put him on the map. Neile, in contrast, was the one with the established career and a level of professional security that McQueen lacked. And instead of holding that over him, she extended a hand. She introduced him to her agent, an act that proved pivotal for his career. Those introductions gave McQueen access to opportunities that might otherwise have taken him years to find. Neile's support did not stop there. After their marriage, she gradually began to put her own career on hold to focus on McQueen's ambitions. She didn't just stand beside him as a wife. She worked behind the scenes as his partner in strategy. She read scripts, advised him on which roles to accept, and helped guide the early choices that shaped his path to stardom. McQueen's rise was built on the foundation she provided. She gave him stability, she gave him counsel, and she gave him the confidence that comes from having someone believe in you completely. Their bond went beyond professional collaboration. Both Neile and Steve carried the scars of difficult childhoods. Neile had survived war, separation, and hardship, while McQueen had endured a brutal upbringing marked by abandonment, instability, and maltreatment. His father left when he was a child, his mother struggled to provide, and he spent time in reform schools where violence and neglect were constant. These shared histories of pain and survival created a deep emotional connection between them. They both understood what it meant to grow up without a safety net, to feel unwanted or overlooked, and to fight for survival. That shared understanding made their attraction more than just physical. It created a sense of kinship, as though each had finally found someone who truly understood the other's inner wounds. But while they were bonded by similar traumas, the way they coped with those scars was vastly different. Neile's instinct was to stabilize, to nurture, and to build a sense of safety. She had taken control of her life by working hard, by being disciplined, and by channeling her energy into her career, and later into her marriage. McQueen, on the other hand, dealt with his pain through rebellion, risk, and escape. He lived for adrenaline, fast cars, motorcycles, and reckless behavior. In fact, he often masked his insecurities with aggression or control. These coping mechanisms would later clash, but in the early days, they created a dynamic that felt exciting, even intoxicating. Together, they looked like a glamorous couple on the rise, but beneath the surface, their relationship was already built on fragile ground. Passion and trauma bonded them quickly, but those same forces would later create cracks that could not easily be repaired. As McQueen's star began to rise, thanks in large part to Neile's guidance and the opportunities she helped secure, the balance of their relationship started to shift. What began as a marriage where Neile's influence and stability carried him forward would soon transform into a struggle as McQueen's fame, ego, and demons began to dominate their lives. Cracks begin to show. The early years of Neile Adams and Steve McQueen's marriage were marked by passion, ambition, and the sense that together they could conquer Hollywood. But the very traits that drew Neile to Steve soon became the very things that began to unravel their relationship. Steve McQueen rose quickly from obscurity to become one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. By the 1960s, his roles in movies like The Great Escape and Le Mans cemented him as the ultimate anti-hero, the king of cool. His image was that of a man who lived by his own rules and was stoic, rebellious, and effortlessly magnetic. But the very qualities that made him a cultural icon also made him difficult, moody, and often combative behind the scenes and at home. McQueen developed a reputation in Hollywood for being controlling and demanding. He was not satisfied with simply being part of a production. He wanted to dominate it. He insisted on top billing, even in projects where other actors had equal or greater star power. One of the most famous examples was his rivalry with Paul Newman. He reportedly refused a co-starring role with Paul in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid because he insisted on getting top billing. This kind of behavior reflected his deep insecurities, especially the abandoned child still lurking beneath the superstar exterior. But for those around him, it often translated to tension, ego clashes, and constant battles for control. Away from the cameras, McQueen's rebellious nature manifested in other destructive ways. He became heavily involved in illicit substance use, and by many accounts, it became a constant part of his daily routine. What had once been a man with raw energy and focus was increasingly a man whose moods could swing wildly depending on what he had consumed. He could be charming one moment, then irritable or explosive the next. For Neile, who had given up much of her own career to support him, living in this environment was emotionally exhausting. Her isolation grew as his fame soared. The more McQueen became a household name, the more Neile found herself pushed into the background. At first, she had been the one reading scripts with him, advising him on career moves, and helping him navigate the industry. But as his power grew, he no longer leaned on her guidance in the same way. Instead, she was expected to play the role of the loyal wife, always present but rarely seen, supportive but never center stage. And this erasure was extremely devastating. But what dealt the biggest blow to their marriage were the affairs. Infidelity crept into their marriage almost from the very beginning. In 1957, just a year after they married, McQueen had his first known affair with actress Lita Milan. It was a shattering realization for Neile. The man she had given so much to was betraying her trust in the most personal way possible. Neile later revealed that when she confided in her mother about the heartbreak, the response was blunt and chilling. Her mother reminded her that successful men rarely do not have affairs. This statement was not meant to excuse the behavior, but rather to prepare her for the reality of being married to a man who now had the world at his feet. That advice, while pragmatic, did little to ease the pain. Neile struggled with the emotional toll of living with constant suspicion and the knowledge that her husband's attention was rarely hers alone. To make matters worse, McQueen's affairs were not hidden carefully. They became an open secret and part of the myth of Steve McQueen as a man who could not be tied down, even by marriage. Neile found it humiliating, and yet she stayed, torn between love, loyalty, and the hope that things might change. Behind closed doors, the marriage became a cycle of highs and lows. There were still moments of tenderness, and moments when McQueen showed the vulnerable side that Neile had fallen in love with, especially the boy who had survived abandonment and the man who needed her to anchor him. But those moments were increasingly rare, drowned out by his erratic behavior, his controlling nature, and the constant betrayals that had become unbearable. McQueen's rise to fame had given him everything he thought he wanted. But instead of finding peace and success, he seemed only more restless, more paranoid, and more reckless. He lived like a man always running from something, and in doing so, he left a trail of emotional wreckage behind him, especially for Neile. The cracks in their marriage were no longer hidden. Friends and colleagues noticed the tension. Neile herself began to feel that she was living in the shadow of a man who was admired by the world, but who, in private, could be cruel, distant, and impossible to reach. Her early sacrifices for his career had given him the platform to become a legend, but in return, she was left feeling drained, unseen, and trapped in a marriage that was slowly breaking her down. The passion that had once defined their union now revealed itself as volatility. She once said, "When he was good, he was adorable, and when he was bad, he was a pain." And as the years went on, the cracks widened into fractures that could no longer be ignored. What had once been a marriage filled with hope was on the verge of collapse, setting the stage for a painful and public unraveling. The divorce and emotional toll. By the late 1960s, the fractures in Neile Adams and Steve McQueen's marriage were no longer cracks that could be ignored. They had become gaping wounds. McQueen's infidelities, mood swings, and increasingly destructive lifestyle had drained Neile emotionally and left her feeling trapped. For years, she had endured humiliation, isolation, and betrayal, staying loyal in the hope that the man she loved might finally change. But the breaking point came in a way that neither of them could have predicted. After years of suffering through McQueen's repeated affairs, Neile herself entered into a relationship outside of the marriage. It was not an impulsive fling, but rather a desperate response to years of neglect and pain. For so long, she had sacrificed her own needs, placing McQueen's career and desires above her own. The affair was a turning point and a signal that she could no longer carry the weight of his betrayals silently. But while McQueen had demanded tolerance for his own behavior, he was unable to extend the same to her. When McQueen discovered Neile's infidelity, his reaction was explosive and deeply frightening. Consumed by rage, he interrogated her in a way that revealed just how volatile their marriage had become. For Neile, this was the moment the danger became undeniable. The marriage was no longer just emotionally destructive, it had escalated. In the aftermath of this physical confrontation, Neile sought professional guidance. A therapist, recognizing the escalating danger she faced, gave her blunt but life-saving advice. She needed to get out. Staying with McQueen meant living in constant fear, and the risk was no longer worth the hope of reconciliation. With that counsel, Neile made one of the most difficult decisions of her life. She filed for divorce. The legal process was painful, drawn out, and emotionally exhausting. After 16 years of marriage, Neile was walking away from the man she had once believed was her soulmate, the man whose career she had nurtured and supported from the very beginning. The divorce was finalized in 1972, at the very moment McQueen was filming The Getaway. Ironically, it was during the production of that film that McQueen began a relationship with his co-star Ali MacGraw, who would soon become his second wife. In 1973, McQueen married MacGraw, and their union was splashed across headlines as Hollywood's newest power couple. To the public, it looked like McQueen had moved on effortlessly, stepping into another glamorous chapter of his life. But to Neile, the story was far more complicated. Despite the betrayal, humiliation, and the divorce, she still felt emotionally tied to him. Years later, she admitted that a part of her still believed, deep down, that he was still hers. This confession captured the complicated truth of their relationship. Even after everything, she could not completely sever the emotional bond she had with McQueen. The divorce was not just the end of a marriage, but the shattering of a dream. She had once believed that their shared pain, ambition, and their deep emotional connection would bind them forever. Instead, she was left with heartbreak, trauma, and the realization that love alone could not overcome McQueen's demons. Yet, even in separation, she could not stop caring for him. Their lives had been so intertwined that untangling her identity from his was nearly impossible. When McQueen was diagnosed with cancer in 1979 and later passed away in 1980 at just 50 years old, Neile was still deeply affected. Despite the years of distance and the pain he had caused her, his death felt like the loss of a part of herself. He had been her great love, her greatest heartbreak, and the man whose presence had defined much of her adult life. And moving forward meant carrying the weight of both love and trauma, a dual legacy that would never fully leave her. While McQueen's legend continued to grow long after his death, Neile's later confessions showed the human cost of living alongside that legend. For every glamorous image of the king of cool speeding on a motorcycle or dominating the silver screen, there was a woman who had endured the chaos and violence behind the scenes. But Neile's story did not end with divorce or with Steve McQueen's death. Her life after him would prove that she was more than just the wife of a Hollywood star. She was a survivor, an artist, and a woman determined to reclaim her identity. Life after Steve McQueen. The death of Steve McQueen in 1980 left Neile Adams with complicated emotions of grief, love, anger, and relief, all intertwined. Her life did not end with Steve and the failed marriage. Instead, Neile found a way to rebuild, move forward, and prove that her identity extended far beyond being the first wife of a Hollywood legend. That same year, she found a new companionship and stability in Alvin Toffel, a political campaign manager and financial consultant. The marriage brought her the peace and partnership she had been denied for so many years. Toffel was steady, supportive, and devoted, and their union lasted until his passing in 2005. Unlike her marriage to McQueen, which had been marked by turbulence and drama, her years with Toffel offered balance and quiet strength. For Neile, it was a second chance at love, and this time it was built on mutual respect rather than volatility. Even as she settled into a more stable personal life, Neile never abandoned the stage. Performing had always been her first passion, and she returned to it with renewed energy. She continued to work in the entertainment industry, where she combined song, dance, and storytelling to reflect on her extraordinary journey. These performances were more than just entertainment. They were intimate glimpses into the life of a woman who had seen Hollywood from both its glittering heights and its darkest corners. Her charisma and presence reminded people that she was not just a figure in Steve McQueen's shadow, but a talented artist in her own right. Neile also became an advocate for representation, particularly for Filipino and Asian American performers in Hollywood. Having faced barriers early in her career because of her heritage, she used her platform to highlight the importance of inclusivity and to encourage a new generation of performers not to let their backgrounds limit their ambitions. In an industry that was still evolving slowly when it came to diversity, her voice carried weight because she had lived through its exclusions firsthand. Perhaps her most enduring contribution after McQueen's death came through her writing. In 1986, she published My Husband, My Friend, a memoir that revealed the private truth of her marriage. It was a candid account filled with intimate details of love, maltreatment, betrayal, and survival. But Neile did not write the book to scandalize or to attack McQueen's legacy. Instead, she wrote it to grieve, to process her trauma, and, most importantly, to leave an honest record for her children. She wanted them to understand not just the Hollywood legend the world adored, but the flawed and troubled man she had lived with. The book became a touchstone for those who admired McQueen, but wanted to understand the real story, and for women who saw in Neile's resilience a reflection of their own struggles. In the years that followed, she continued to participate in interviews, panels, and author series, sharing her story with candor and strength. She spoke openly about the physical confrontations, the affairs, and the turmoil, but always balanced it with recognition of the love that had once been there. Reflecting on the failed marriage in an interview, she said, "It is a great love story. It really is. It is a universal story. We married, we had a great life, and then we divorced because of this craziness. But I was always in his life. As he used to say, it was always you. I was always there for him. He always asked me for advice." Her willingness to be vulnerable made her voice powerful, and she helped reshape the way history remembers Steve McQueen as a man whose brilliance came at a cost to those closest to him. Today, Neile Adams reportedly lives in Century City, California, surrounded by memories of her extraordinary life. Photographs from her Broadway days, mementos from her career in film and television, and reminders of her time with McQueen remain part of her daily environment. Despite the hardships she endured, she has remained deeply connected to the arts and to the community of performers that shaped her identity. In recent years, Neile has remained active by maintaining her presence in the world of entertainment. Her vitality and commitment to storytelling are proof of the resilience that defined her from childhood, when she survived a war, to adulthood, when she survived a tumultuous marriage. Her story continues to resonate so strongly that it is now being adapted into a film titled The McQueens. The project promises to explore not only Steve McQueen's legacy, but also Neile's role in shaping his life and career, and the cost she bore in the process. For Neile, this adaptation is a recognition of her truth and a reminder that her perspective matters in the broader history of Hollywood. And while she will forever be linked to the King of Cool, her legacy stands on its own as a performer, a survivor, and a woman who transformed heartbreak into strength. What do you think about the way Neile Adams and Steve McQueen's marriage ended? Drop your answers in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.